first on the list, we have Demon's Alley, a mysterious ghost town in New Jersey. The alley is made up of a handful of abandoned houses located off Route 23 in West Milford. Although there is no official record as to why the homes, which have been around since before anyone can remember, were abandoned in the first place, there are many theories that have speculated the cause. The most popular of which tells the story of a seemingly regular man who moved into the neighborhood, after which strange things began to happen. It appears as though this normal man was actually the leader of a large, very sinister cult. A fact which of course was unbeknownst to his neighbors, who upon receiving an invitation to the man's home happily obliged. It is said that once all of the members of the neighborhood had finally arrived, they were trapped inside to endure nothing short of a horrific tragedy, as members of the man's cult emerged from the shadows and massacred every last one. Our next town is the infamous Roanoke, and unlike Demon Alley, whose residents disappeared without a trace, the story of Roanoke is just slightly more bizarre, as an entire colony, including all of their homes and belongings, are said to disappeared. If you're a horror buff, you might recognize the name from season 6 of American Horror Story, which depicts the town in all its dark and gory glory, but again, that's a TV show, so let's get down to the facts. Roanoke, also known as the town that never was located in what's now known as Dare County in North Carolina. There is much more mystery than information surrounding the disappearance, but it is said that John White, an English artist, discovered the town around 1585, after which he returned back to England. In 1590, however, he made his way back to Roanoke to visit the locals whom he'd befriended on his first voyage, but was absolutely shocked when, upon his arrival, he found the town completely abandoned. Even the houses had disappeared, and in their place a barrier fort was placed, and one word, Croatoan, was carved into a wooden post. Next up, we have Pine Point, located in the Northwest Territories in Canada. The small lead and zinc mining town that completely vanished in the 1980s, just 25 years after it was originally established in the 1960s. The town came to be as a result of a joint venture between the Government of Canada and the Cominco Mining Company, and was fully equipped with schools and small town businesses. When the Cominco mine officially shut its doors in 1988, the town's erasure begun. As buildings were knocked down, residents quickly evacuated until there was nothing left more than the shell of a thing that once was. Now, I can understand Cominco deciding to end its involvement in the town. Perhaps the mines ran out of their precious lead or zinc. Perhaps the mines ran out of their precious lead or zinc that had led to the town's creation in the first place. But to begin knocking down buildings and pushing the town into a void of non-existence? Call me a cynic, but I think there's something more to it. Alright, for this next one, we might be veering slightly off the rails, but bear with me as we discuss the United Kingdom of Torrid. Was it a town that vanished? One that never existed at all? Or perhaps maybe one that did exist or does exist, but in a universe entirely separate from our own? The story begins in July of 1954 in a Japanese airport when a real man by the name of John Allen Kucher Zergis presented a passport in which the agent at the desk had never seen before. In fact, no one had ever seen it before, as the passport had been issued by the United Kingdom of Torrid, which as far as we know doesn't exist. You're probably thinking he was thrown out of the airport and never made his flight, but the strange part is that he had actually just gotten off a flight, his passport having been stamped and checked multiple times before boarding. So what was going on? When questioned, the man insisted that the United Kingdom of Torrid was in fact a real place, and demanded someone bring him a map so he could provide some much needed education to the agents. Upon seeing the map, however, he became angry. He pointed to an area on the border between France and Madrid and asked why they would have provided him with a fake map. Police decided it would be best to question the man, and so they put him up in a hotel for the night with the hopes of doing so the next day, his room guarded by 2 officers. However, the next morning, the room was completely empty. The man had vanished along with his passport and any trace of the unknown country. Some people believe this story, the presence of the man and the existence of a legitimate passport issued by what appeared to be a legitimate government, is proof of a parallel universe, but what do you guys think? Share it in the comments and I'll take a look. And next on the list, we have Villa Epicuan in Argentina, a small village on a lake just 6 hours away from the capital capital, Buenos Aires. The town was created in 1920 when an Englishman saw the land and decided to lease it with the hopes of converting it into a tourist hotspot. He built a resort and paid local scientists to back his claims that the town's lake had healing properties, and all of a sudden, business was booming. Argentinian natives flocked to the area for a chance to experience the waters, along with many Jewish tourists who had found interest in the lake's uncanny similarity to the Dead Sea. While you might be thinking visitors to the town were unfortunate victims of a tourist trap, the mineral-rich lake really did have restorative properties and helped many people with arthritis, skin conditions, and even diabetes. The good fortune did eventually come to an end, however, when in 1985 it started to rain, and rain, and rain some more. So much so that water levels began to rise at a rate of 1 centimeter per hour. And by the end of it all, after 2 weeks of heavy rainfall and a broken dam, the water was 3 meters deep and the town was evacuated. It seems that all the water had given, it had also swiftly taken away. The town remained empty even after the water levels subsided many years later, except for Pablo Novak, age 39, who was born in the town and who remains to this day living in solitude in the ghost of a town that once was. Next on the list, we have Varosha Famagusta on the island of Cyprus. Once a booming tourist town, the area is now nothing more than memories and ruins. In the late 1960s, the town had an estimated population of 60,000 individuals, a number which rose significantly in the high season to 100,000 people staying in the town. So, what happened to it? Well, in 1974, Turkey invaded the island country, causing citywide evacuations. The town was left abandoned and frozen in time, as occupants of the area had to flee quickly, leaving behind all of their belongings as if they had just run out to the store, expecting to be back home in no less than 20 minutes. After the attack, however, the town was fenced off from the rest of the island and no one was allowed to return, not even to retrieve items left behind. Because of this, the town still stands today, deserted and eerie, a snapshot in time, untouched for over 50 years. And next we have Hashima, Japan, also known as Battleship Island. So not just a town, but an entire island that became nothing more than a ghost town. The island was discovered about 9 miles, 15 kilometers away from the city of Nagasaki. And in 1810, coal was discovered there, an incredibly valuable resource at the time. In 1887, the island was converted into a mining facility inhabited by over 5,000 individuals. But that didn't last long, as in 1974, petroleum was becoming the preferred power product, and so with coal becoming assumingly obsolete, the mining facility was shut down. Because the mine was the island's only source of infrastructure, its foreclosure led to the departure of the entirety of the town's inhabitants. Today, the island, with its gray buildings and concrete moat, stands abandoned in the sea, closely resembling some kind of island battleship hybrid, hence its fitting nickname, Battleship Island. Next up, we have Bodie, California, another town frozen in time. In 1877, Bodie and its massive gold mine became the place to be for those hoping to make it rich, which honestly was not a bad move, as the town did produce more than $38 million worth of gold and silver during its approximately 5-year run. When the town was no longer lucrative, the residents began to slowly depart, moving on to bigger and better financial opportunities. By 1915, the area was considered a literal ghost town, believed to be haunted by past members of the community. Today, it stands abandoned, with stores and homes fully stocked and forgotten, a symbol of the late 1980s American history. Starting off our top 2, we have Centralia, Pennsylvania, aka the town on fire. The town was abandoned in 1982, 20 years after an underground fire had broken out in one of the coal mines that ran beneath it, a fire that still burns to this day. Of course, as you can imagine, living in a town that is essentially burning from the ground up is not ideal, but for some reason no major concern was raised until 1979, when a local gas station owner noticed that the temperature of the gas being stored in underground tanks had reached a temperature of 77 degrees Celsius, 172 degrees Fahrenheit. And even still, little movement was made out of the town at this time. It wasn't until 1982, when a sinkhole opened up in a local resident's backyard, that people started to realize the true gravity of the situation. Not only did a young boy fall into the sinkhole, which he did survive by the way, the massive opening in the earth was spewing out lethal amounts of carbon monoxide gas. It was, finally, at this point that Congress voted to fund the relocation of all the townspeople. But believe it or not, underground fires, possible gas explosions, and lethal exposure still wasn't enough to convince some of the residents to leave their home, meaning there are still an incredibly stubborn few who still reside in Centralia to this day. That's wild. And finally, because I appreciate you all so much, we've got a 3-for-1. The disappearance of Louisiana towns Ruddock, Wangram, and Frenier in 1915. The trio, located on the southwest edge of Lake Pontchartrain, were major hotspots of immigration for German cabbage farmers, if you can believe it. The towns met their end on September 19th when a massive hurricane moved in from the Caribbean with surges of 13 feet and 125-mile-per-hour winds. On that day, the towns were completely washed away and over 300 lives were lost. While this is tragic, it's also scientifically explainable. But what isn't is the way that the storm and the many fatalities had been foretold. Records of the town, corresponding with records of voodoo priestesses, recall a woman by the name of Julia Brown, who served as a local healer. She was also quite the entertainer, spending her evenings sitting on her front porch, playing her guitar and singing made-up songs. But as she neared the end of her life, things began to take a sinister turn. Songs which once illustrated beauty and joy had been replaced by a tune of warning, as the woman sang that one day she would die and everything would die with her. Eventually, Julia did pass, and her funeral was held on October 2nd of 1915, the very day the storm rolled into town.
Next up, we have La Noria in Chile. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this place was a buzzing salt pepper mining town filled with life and industry. But as time went on, the demand for salt pepper declined, and by the mid-20th century, La Noria was left abandoned. Now, when you visit La Noria, you'll find it frozen in time. The town's buildings have decayed though, but what makes this ghost town especially creepy is all the bones. More on that in a minute. Walking through the deserted streets, you can't escape the feeling of stepping back in time when La Noria was a thriving hub of activity. The place is also very isolated. It's in the middle of the desert, so that definitely adds another layer of spookiness to the place. But as stated before, one of the most haunting aspects of this place is the old cemetery and all the damn human bones. Here you'll find open coffins, some still housing human remains. Over the years, the ghost town was looted, so bones are scattered everywhere, pretty unsettling. It's said that you should never wander to this town at night, as the tortured souls of the dead rise from their graves and wander about. Next on the list is Oradour-sur-Glane in France. Oradour-sur-Glane, a village in France, holds a very dark and tragic history from World War II. Back in 1944, during the chaos that was the Second World War, the quiet village became the site of a brutal massacre by German troops. It's a very heartbreaking story where German soldiers laid waste to the entire village, not even sparing women and children. They left the village in complete ruin, and these were mostly civilians. They would herd them into churches and set them on fire, gunning down anyone who attempted to escape through the windows. It was just a complete massacre. Only 6 members of the village actually managed to escape. The village was never rebuilt either. The remains still stand today though, just frozen in time, like left exactly as it was when these horrors unfolded. The streets, buildings, and even the vehicles remain as they were, showing the signs of violence that took place there. As you can probably imagine, the place is eerily quiet. There's no one living there, and the usual sounds of daily life are completely missing. Number 5, Mount Sinabung, Indonesia. Mount Sinabung in Indonesia. This is something that is still ongoing. It's a series of volcanic eruptions that have led to the evacuation of villages in the surrounding area of the volcano. Mount Sinabung, located in North Sumatra, has been active for centuries, but in recent years it's become particularly volatile, and the eruptions have posed a significant threat to the communities living in the vicinity of it. When Sinabung starts to rumble and spew ash and lava, local authorities kick into action. They closely monitor the volcano's activity and issue evacuation orders when necessary to ensure the safety of the residents, and these orders are not taken lightly, as volcanic eruptions can be unpredictable and of course deadly. The process of evacuating towns and villages near the volcano is pretty challenging. Families leave their homes behind, their possessions, and sometimes even their livelihoods. Temporary shelters are set up to provide a safe haven for those displaced by the eruptions, and these shelters offer basic necessities like food and water, medical assistance, but the evacuations are not only a physical upheaval, but also an emotional one. As you can imagine, families are forced to leave behind their ancestral lands and the life they've known for generations. And at number 4, Bangalore in India. Tucked away in the Alwar district in Rajasthan, Bangalore isn't your average town. It's famous, or perhaps infamous, for being one of the spookiest spots in the country. So the story goes like this. Supposedly, back in the 17th century, a sorcerer cast a curse on the village and things went downhill from there. The place was abandoned, and it's been a ghost town ever since. People who visit often say they feel this strange, unsettling vibe, especially after dark. Some even claim they've seen ghostly apparitions. Bangalore isn't your typical tourist spot, but it draws in thrill seekers and folks curious about the supernatural. Folks like me, I would absolutely love to check this place out. The town's got these, of course, old ruins, forts, temples, and houses just sitting there as if time stopped centuries ago. And speaking of time, they've got a rule: nobody's allowed in after sunset, because, you know, ghosts and demons and all that. Obviously hard to say if the place is genuinely haunted, but the legends surrounding the place and the deserted structures make it a magnet for those who, love a good scare and dose of history at the same time. At our number 3 spot, let me take you to Ruby, Arizona. It's a real gem in the desert. Wish I could say that pun was not intended, but it was. Back in the early 20th century, this place was buzzing with life, all thanks to the copper mining boom. It was a kind of town where everybody knew everybody, and things were looking pretty good. But as they say, what goes up must come down, and the copper boom fizzled out, and by the mid-1900s, Ruby was nothing more than a ghost town. The folks moved on, and what they left behind is a piece of history stuck in time. Those that wander around Ruby today feel like they're stepping into a time capsule. There are houses, a school, a general store, all just sitting there as if the residents were there one second and gone the very next. A slice of life from another era preserved in the desert. What makes Ruby even cooler is its remote location. You're out there in the rugged desert and you can't help but feel a sense of isolation. As you can imagine, I've never been. That's probably why it's a magnet though for history buffs and folks who love exploring the past. And at our second place spot, we have Poveglia in Italy. This small island off the coast of Italy is known for being one of the most haunted places in the country. Poveglia's history is pretty dark. Back in the days of the bubonic plague, they used this entire island as a quarantine zone for the sick and dying, and thousands of people who were infected with the plague were shipped off here to keep the disease from spreading to the mainland. You can only imagine the horrors that went on. No surprise why this place is often referred to as the Island of Death. As if that's not creepy enough though, in 1922 there was a mental hospital built here. Rumor has it that some pretty messed up experiments were conducted on the patients too. Stories of mistreatment and suffering are enough to send a shiver down your spine, and today Poveglia is abandoned and it's said to be one of the most haunted places in Italy. Visitors have reported strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and an overall sense of dread when they set foot on the island. But considering its history, it's not very surprising. In fact, though, the Italian government has banned people from going there. You need special permission to even get close. Finally, though, we have Pripyat in the Ukraine. Probably the most famous abandoned town in history. Pripyat was once a bustling city, home to workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It was a typical Soviet-style town with apartment buildings, schools, all the amenities you'd expect in a thriving community. Life was humming along until that fateful day on April 26th, 1986, when the Chernobyl disaster struck. There was a catastrophic explosion at the nuclear plant that released a massive amount of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Pripyat, being just a stone's throw away, was in the direct path of the destruction. The entire city was evacuated in a hurry, and its residents left behind their homes. Some of their belongings are still there. Even their pets were left behind, thinking at the time that they'd return soon, but they never did. And today, Pripyat is a complete ghost town. The abandoned buildings, the rusted playgrounds, the empty streets, that's all that remains. A time capsule of Soviet life in the 80s, but with a radioactive twist. Because yeah, the post-apocalyptic looking setting isn't creepy enough already. There are mutated animals that have been reported in the area too. Would definitely be a pretty surreal place to experience. Geiger counters click away as you walk through the eerily quiet streets. Nature is taken over with trees growing through apartment windows and wildlife returning to the area. Would you ever visit this place? I honestly think I would. If all the proper safety measures were in check, I think I'd have to.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Olmec civilization. The Olmec civilization has often been referred to as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, and from somewhere between 1400 to 400 BC, the civilization rose in the Mexican Gulf Coast. The name Olmec came because they lived in the Olmen, the land of rubber. The Olmec civilization was thriving and advanced, and they too had their own mysterious stone structures known as the Olmec colossal heads. They even were able to successfully build aqueducts, which is an amazing feat for the time period. The civilization, however, started to see its decline around 400 BC. During this time, two of their major cities were just abandoned, which is very mysterious and of course super strange. They left behind everything, their buildings and structures, artifacts and statues. They just seemingly picked up and left. There isn't much left to go on, to be totally honest, but experts believe that some sort of natural disaster might have been a cause for the disappearance. Something like a drought or an eruption could have wreaked havoc on their food supply. There is also the possibility of conflict between them and other civilizations in the area. At the end of the day, exactly what happened here remains quite a mystery, with only the remains of the civilization left to look at for clues. In our number 9 spot today, we have the ancestral Puebloans. This group, who were a culture of indigenous Americans, built their lives in what is now referred to as the Four Corners region of the United States. This area now consists of southeastern Utah, northeastern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico, and southwestern Colorado. This group was able to create beautiful stone homes into the side of cliffs during the 12th and 13th centuries. When I tell you that the level of skill and work this took was incredible, it really was. Some of these places would have hundreds of rooms, and they were the tallest buildings in the United States until the creation of skyscrapers in the late 1800s. That is absolutely wild. Unfortunately, these works of arts wouldn't be lived in for long, as the civilization met a rapid and violent decline. Many experts will point to religious and political conflict as a contributing factor to the decline of this civilization, but no one is totally clear. What we do know is that there have been discoveries in the area that point to violence, human consumption, water management problems exacerbated by a drought, just a lot of bad stuff that clearly shows the ending was an incredibly tough time for the people going through it. In the end, this all led to many of these people having to abandon their homes and flee south. While this settlement collapsed, it doesn't mean that the culture or the people were entirely gone. Many modern-day descendants of this civilization include the Hopi and the Zuni peoples. In our number 8 spot today, we have Cahokia. This settlement was established somewhere around 1,200 years ago, and it was a river valley community located near what is now St. Louis, Missouri in the United States. This is actually quite an incredible settlement because it was the largest north of Mexico at the time, with a population of around 20,000 people. The city had things like buildings, plazas, and one of the things that they were most known for was these massive mounds. The largest was known as the Monk's Mound, and it was 100 feet tall. The location of this settlement proved to be amazing for a while. Its spot near several rivers made it the perfect trading location. This was all great and ideal until it really wasn't. Experts believe that somewhere around 1200 AD, the population was wiped out by a massive flood that hit the area. Some wondered if the flood only contributed to an already dwindling civilization because they believed that perhaps resources in the area were quickly disappearing, or maybe they had been hit by disease. Others believed that the flood was the first massive event, but that perhaps it was followed by a little ice age that only sealed the fate. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Maya. The Maya are often referred to as one of the most advanced civilizations in our history. They carved huge stone cities in the jungles of South Mexico and Central America, and they weren't just plain and simple places. They were filled with plazas, palaces, pyramids, and temples. They created one of the most famous calendars. They had math and astronomy. This is all to say that this was one of the most thriving civilizations, and they reached their peak around 250 to 900 AD. Here's the thing though, nobody is entirely sure what happened after this. It is believed that it was most likely a combination of famine and drought, as well as the change the environment saw due to the deforestation that happened for farming. This all would have caused there to be a lot more civil unrest, and it's likely that neighboring cities would have turned on each other. We do know, however, that it took around 200 years for the civilization to disappear, so it wasn't just one single event, and it was quite a process, which is such a testament to how strong the Maya people were. While talking about this, it is very important for me to note that I'm talking about the downfall of the Maya civilization and not the downfall of the Maya as people. There are many people still alive with Maya ancestry who live all over our world. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Indus. The Indus became one of the world's earliest civilizations as they began to build their settlements some 8,000 years ago. They live in what is now India and Pakistan, and they expanded over great distances, 386,000 square miles, which is far more than other, more well-known civilizations of a similar time period. In fact, this group is thriving so much that they accounted for around an estimated 10% of the world's population at the time. The civilization was completely thriving until around 1900 BC, when things took a serious turn for the worst. They began to abandon cities and started to move southeast, and no one is entirely sure why. There was a leading theory that perhaps other groups of people from the north brought about their collapse, but that theory has since been put aside. At this point in time, more recent research is pointing towards a hiatus in the monsoon season that could have played a role in the downfall. When the monsoon season disappeared for essentially 2 centuries, this of course would make it nearly impossible for them to continue farming for food in the way that they had. Experts believe some other factors also played a role, such as natural disasters like earthquakes, or even the outbreak of some diseases like malaria or cholera. In our number 5 spot today, we have Easter Island. Oh, Easter Island. Many of us have heard of Easter Island before, whether it's because of the world famous stone statues or because of its incredible remoteness, but whatever the reason, let's take it back to the beginning. Sometime between 300 and 1200 AD, the Rapa Nui people found and settled the island. This is quite the feat already, considering the closest continental point to Easter Island is a point in central Chile that is 3,512 kilometers away. It's so remote, so the fact that they even found it is amazing, and then what they managed to complete is even more fascinating. Without advanced tools or even wheels, they managed to create the most famous moai statues, the largest of which stood 32 feet tall and weighed 82 tons. Of course, this means that these early people on the island were brilliant, hardworking, and super advanced, but something happened, and by the 1800s, the statues had toppled, the population of the island took a drastic downturn, and the leaders of the island were being overthrown. Experts have been able to get a pretty good idea of what happened in this instance, though. Firstly, they took a look at charcoal fragments as well as pollen in the sediment, and they were able to determine that those living on the island had cut down almost all of the trees, and the rats on the island were eating the seeds of the trees before they had the ability to regerminate. This led to disaster completely. According to an article on History.com written by Jesse Greenspan, quote, "This ecological catastrophe, which eliminated the ability to make rope or seagoing canoes and reduced the populace to burning grass for fuel, may have then ushered in a period of mass starvation and civil war. The arrival of Europeans only added to the decimation, starting in 1722, when the first Europeans to set foot on Easter immediately shot to death several islanders. By the 1870s, several waves of smallpox, along with a major Peruvian slave raid, had reduced the number of natives to roughly 100. Now, Easter Island is a special territory, and it once again has a thriving population. As of 2017, the Chilean census registered that 7,750 people were living on this island, 45% of which considered themselves Rapa Nui. In our number 4 spot today, we have Göbekli Tepe. This is a pre-pottery Neolithic archaeological site that is located in Turkey. This site has been dated all the way back to somewhere from 9,500 to 8,000 BC, making it the world's oldest known megaliths, which truly is just incredible. This site is comprised of a bunch of large circular structures that are being supported by massive stone pillars, many of which are decorated with abstract, anthropomorphic details, and things which have provided very rare and very valuable insight into prehistoric religion and the iconography of the times when it was built. One of the most amazing things about this area is that it was first used at the beginning of the Neolithic period, which marks the oldest human settlements anywhere in the world. It has been called the world's first temple, and it was used by groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers from a wide area. Here's what makes this so remarkably interesting though. Despite what I said earlier, this place is not a settlement and instead was used by many people. The site was essentially built by Stone Age humans who came from about a 200-kilometer radius around the site. It isn't quite clear why they stopped using it, but what is clear is that without a doubt, this was one of the best archaeological finds our modern society has ever had, as it gives us just a glimpse into what life was like in prehistoric times, and it totally changes what we once thought about the timeline of our history. In our number 3 spot today, we have Çatalhöyük. Moving on over from Göbekli Tepe, we have this settlement that sits not too far away at all. Located in what is now Turkey, this settlement was thriving around 8,000 years ago and was known specifically for its engineering and architecture. One really cool thing about how this city was set up was, rather than traditional roads, the people who lived there got around by using the rooftops. I'd feel like I was in Assassin's Creed. That sounds so cool, but I guess for them it was just the most logical setup, especially considering all of the buildings were connected to one another. The people who lived here had a tradition of burying their past loved ones under the floors in their homes, as they did not have any sort of open burial space. In the end, it isn't quite clear exactly what happened to the residents of this ancient city, although there are of course theories. Because of the fact that this city didn't expand as widely as other civilizations seen in the area, many believe that perhaps disease came, spread, and rapidly declined the population. Archaeological work continues on the site, however, even today, to give us every insight possible into the lives of these ancient people. In our number 2 spot today, we have Thonis. I've spoken about Thonis before because this place was super important to legend. Greek legend says that this was the city where Hercules took his first steps into Africa, as well as the place where Paris hid Helen before the Trojan War began, and for years, people thought it was just that. A place in the legends. That was until the early 2000s when it had its modern rediscovery. As it turns out, just over 2,000 years ago, either an earthquake, a tsunami, or a combination of the two hit the city and submerged it underwater. After 5 years of searching, archaeologist Frank Gaudio located the ruins of the city underwater as they had been submerged in the ocean. Since then, excavations and explorations of the ancient city have taken place, and it was stocked full of some incredibly cool treasures from thousands of years ago. In 2010, a type of ancient Nile riverboat was found here, and even just in August of 2021, it was announced that wicker baskets that contained fruits of the duum palm tree, as well as grape seeds that date back to the early 4th century BC, had been found among the ruins. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Skara Brae. This is an area that is located in Scotland, and it was found in an exceptionally surprising way. In 1850, there was a huge storm that hit Scotland, and it was so bad that around 200 people passed away from it. The next day, however, once the storm had passed, residents of the Orkney Isles began to notice that part of a cliff had dislodged, but it uncovered a sort of hidden settlement. Tests were able to date this site back from 3200 BC to 2200 BC, and it was shown to have been inhabited for about 600 years. There were round stone homes here, and the roofs were made out of whalebone and peat. And the design of this little city suggested that there wasn't a hierarchy, but rather a group of people living peacefully as farmers, herdsmen, and traders. While the site is small, the houses are in quite great shape for the amount of time it's been. This little settlement is Europe's most complete Neolithic village, and while it is older than Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids, it's been called the Scottish Pompeii because of how well preserved it is. No one is exactly sure why the residents of this village abandoned it, but it is likely that a change in climate is somewhat, if not fully, responsible, and a storm might have been the reason those living here had to leave in haste, which is deduced by how all of their belongings were left behind.
And we're starting off the list with Nami, Japan. This town in Fukushima Prefecture once housed 20,000 residents, but in one night, in March of 2011, the most destructive earthquake in Japanese history hit off the coast. This caused a massive tsunami that hit a nearby power plant. After 3 meltdowns and widespread nuclear fallout, the residents were forced to evacuate. The town was completely abandoned for a year until April of 2012, when residents were allowed to slowly make their way back in, but only in 2 designated zones. Zone 3 was completely off limits and still remains so to this very day. There have been many attempts to try and rebuild the town into what it once was. Rents have been reduced. There's even been plans to build a Pokemon-themed theme park, but most people just don't want to go anywhere near the place based on the radioactive contamination, which is understandable. Number 9, Kantubek, Uzbekistan. This abandoned town sits on Vozrozdanya Island and was abandoned in 1992 after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. This town was built to house about 1,500 people. Most of its residents were scientists working at a top-secret USSR biological weapons testing site. This place became an absolute nightmare following a couple, little accidents that left a number of people infected with smallpox. After a field test went wrong, 2 people ended up dying. Then about a year later, 2 fishermen were found dead, likely from the bubonic plague that had leaked out of the testing facility. Then antelopes started keeling over and dying. Dead fish were being hauled out of the sea in big nets. The island became a dumping ground for anthrax in the 80s until the lab was finally closed down, with the town becoming deserted by 1992. Apparently there's plans to turn the area into a national park. I would not go anywhere near this place. In 2002, there was a US-led expedition to neutralize the anthrax because they were scared that possible bad people were going to try and get their hands on it. Even still though, I don't know, just let bygones be bygones. Radioactive, is it ever fully gone? And at number 8, we have Cracow, Italy. Man, this place looks beautiful. Just wanted to start by saying that. There's definitely an eeriness with abandoned towns, but this one has such a majestic quality about it. It doesn't look all depressing and gray like an abandoned city you'd see in Russia or something. So, Cracow is a historic hilltop town located in the Basilicata region of southern Italy. Its history dates back to the 8th century when it was founded by the Greeks. The town prospered during the medieval period when its economy based on agriculture and craftsmanship, but in the 20th century, Cracow faced a number of issues. In 1963, a landslide forced many residents to abandon their homes and relocate to a nearby valley. There were also earthquakes in 1972 and 1980, which further damaged the town's infrastructure, making it basically uninhabitable. The Italian government declared Cracow a ghost town, and the remaining residents were forced to leave due to safety concerns. Today, the town stands as this hauntingly beautiful shell of what it once was. The buildings are crumbling, the streets are empty, at least when tourists aren't visiting. The town's also been used for a filming location for a number of movies, most notably Quantum of Solace. Next on the list is Wittenoom, Australia. This is just a very sad story. So, this town was built in 1947 in Pilbara, Western Australia, housed 20,000 residents, and was bustling with life. At one point, they had a movie theater, 2 schools, a hotel. The parents of most of the families living there, though, worked in the nearby Blue Asbestos Mine. This was a time where people didn't know how harmful asbestos was. By the mid-60s, though, it became a known thing and the mine was shut down and a lot of residents up and left. The thing is, they'd already been exposed to it for so long, over 2,000 of these former residents would go on to die of asbestos-related illnesses. The area has now become known as Australia's Chernobyl. Number 6, Pyramiden. Pyramiden in Svalbard, Norway was once a thriving Soviet coal mining settlement established in 1910 by Sweden. It was later sold to the Soviet Union in 1927. The town's name translates to the pyramid in various languages, named after the pyramid-shaped mountain nearby. During its peak, Pyramiden housed a significant population. The town's economy relied heavily on coal mining, and it continued to operate under Soviet management until the early 90s, but in 98, Pyramiden was abruptly abandoned when mining ceased. The residents left behind buildings, possessions, and remnants of this once vibrant community, and today Pyramiden stands frozen in time as a ghost town. And the harsh Arctic climate has preserved the town remarkably well. Buildings remain standing, showcasing this Soviet-era architecture and interiors, and the town's infrastructure, including the swimming pool, school, cultural center, still eerily intact. And at number 5, Bannock, Montana. This abandoned town in Beaverhead County, Montana was founded in 1862 after the discovery of gold in Grasshopper Creek. It quickly became a booming mining town, attracting thousands of prospectors and settlers seeking fortune in the gold fields. With the prospect of wealth, though, came a ton of violence and lawlessness. In 1863, the infamous Plummer Gang, led by Henry Plummer, became the town's sheriff, secretly organizing a gang of outlaws who terrorized the area. There were a series of robberies, stagecoach holdups, violent deaths happened as a result. The citizens, fed up with this rampant crime, formed the Vigilance Committee, which eventually captured and hanged over 20 members of this gang, including Plummer, in a single night. Shootouts, barroom brawls, other violent incidents, it was just happening all the time here back in the day. It was your classic Wild West town. But as the gold reserves dwindled and new mining opportunities came about in other places, the town's population started to decline. Today, Bannock stands as this well-preserved ghost town with over 60 historic structures remaining, including houses, saloons, and a schoolhouse. Because of its violent history, though, some visitors and locals believe the place to be haunted. Numerous ghost stories and paranormal encounters have been reported over the years. Next on the list, we have Frisco in Beaver County, Utah. This was a mining town that boomed in the late 19th century. Established in the 1870s, it was named after the San Francisco Mountains. The miners extracted silver, lead, and zinc from nearby mines. During its heyday, Frisco was notorious for its lawlessness and violence. The town earned a reputation as one of the wildest mining camps in the West. Shootouts, brawls, and other violent things were common. At one point, multiple men would die violently on a nightly basis. I've heard up to 12, which is insane. I don't know if that's true. 12 a night? How would you even have people left after like a month? But anyway, but as the mines were depleted and economic opportunities started to die down, the town's population began to decline. By the 1920s, the place was mostly abandoned. It's now a complete ghost town with abandoned structures, crumbling homes, and decaying industrial facilities. In its second place, we have St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo is a ghost town located in Chaffee County, Colorado. Founded in the late 1800s, St. Elmo was once a thriving mining town, mostly focusing on gold and silver mining. There was a general store, hotels, saloons. Over the years, as mining activities started to die down, residents left St. Elmo, and by the 1920s, the town became mostly abandoned. But today, many of its original buildings still stand. This place is a ghost town in more ways than one, though. Annabelle Stark, also known as Dirty Annie, was one of the last residents of the town. She lived there with her brother Tony Stark, who suffered from mental health issues. As the town started to empty, Annabelle and Tony were among the few who still remained, and Tony's mental state deteriorated further due to the isolation and lack of social interaction. He was often seen walking the streets, muttering to himself. Annabelle, caring for her brother, lived a reclusive life in their decaying family home. Dirty Annie Stark became something of a local legend, known for her resilience and determination to stay in St. Elmo despite its abandonment. Some reports suggest that Annabelle and Tony were eventually the very last two residents of the town, refusing to leave even when most of the buildings around them were completely empty. Today, this ghost town is said to be haunted by the ghost of Dirty Annie, still roaming the empty streets at night as its ghostly protector. And finally, we have Ardres-sur-Glane in France. The 10th of June, 1944 was a dark day for the residents of this quiet farming village. SS Major General Heinz Bernhard sent his troops in the Waffen SS Panzer Division to the village in retaliation against French resistance activity in the area. They wanted to send a message, so they destroyed the entire village and pretty much everyone in it. Even people just passing by the area were dragged into the massacre. In the end, only 6 people managed to escape. These victims were just civilians, mostly being women and children. People were taken to barns where they were down with machine guns. Others were loaded into a church which was set on fire. Anyone attempting to escape through the windows were gunned down. It was about as nightmarish as it gets. And today, what remains of the village still stands, left exactly as it was after the massacre. A haunting reminder of the atrocities that took place on that day.
Number 6. Cahalba, Alabama. Cahalba became a ghost town shortly after the Civil War. It was once the capital, but that title was taken away. What is really interesting to me is its ghost, Peague's ghost. In 1862, the story goes that a young couple was out for a walk on a moonlit night. Romantic. As they walked behind Colonel C.C. Peake's house, a glowing ball of white light seemingly just appeared before them. It was just floating on the air. This ball would dart first on one side of the walk and then on the other, and then approach close enough to almost touch them, and then recede and disappear into the shrubbery. And then suddenly it was seen beside them floating again. So they thought the apparition was a trick or something fancy, maybe caused by the same peculiar phase of moon shadows, something like that. So they turned to retrace their steps, and then it happened again and appeared in front of them. Went through the same thing. So at this point, the man and his lady determined to test the materiality of the object, but then he tried to grab it, and then it darted just beyond his reach, disappeared, saw not again. Other people have seen it in the glowing light, will-o-wisp, or whatever it was, from then on was known as Peague's ghost. Number 5. Kennecott, Alaska, USA. Up and to the left in Alaska is Kennecott. It was once a thriving 20th century copper mining town, and it is now desolate. From 1911 to 1938, Kennecott employed as many as 300 people in the mill town and 300 in the mines. It processed nearly $200 million worth of copper, but once the copper tapped out, the company that established the town quickly withdrew from the settlement. Kennecott Copper Corporation left abruptly and left behind their equipment, buildings, and belongings. So now the National Park Service and tour operators offer guided access to several historic buildings, including the 14-story concentration mill. That'd be something fun to see, I think. In that mill, they apparently talk about the tales of lucky fortunes, frontiersmen, and tragic endings that occurred in the remote wilderness. Number 4. Shakespeare, New Mexico, USA. Shakespeare was an old mining town that was frequented by outlaws. It was called Mexican Springs first, then Grand, and then became Ralston City when it was a mining town in 1870. When the silver started running low, the population began to run low as well. But then in 1879, before it was about to be a ghost town first time, most of the land in the city was bought by Colonel William G. Boyle. He gave the town a new start under the name Shakespeare. So apparently Billy the Kid washed dishes at a hotel there, and 2 notorious cattle raiders were captured and hung. The records state that the 2 were hung because Russian Bill stole a horse and Sandy King was just a damn nuisance. So Shakespeare closed down after a bigger town sprung up 3 miles away and the mines closed after the Depression of 1893. So it is now a historic site, preserved as a monument to the real Old West. A lot of these are out, Old West. Pop up for mining, and then they're done. This is me mining now. Number 3. Burke, Idaho, USA. So mines were built in 1884 for silver and lead in Burke, and then the town was built after that. What makes this place cozy is that it is built in a canyon that at its widest measures 300 feet wide. Because of this, the railroad went directly through town and shared the way with cars. Whenever the train passed through, cars would have to pull over. When the railway expanded, it ran right through the town's hotel. A covered walkway connected 2 sides of the buildings, and it let 5 cars of the Northern Pacific Railroad pass through each day. But not everything was well and good in the cozy little town. There were tensions between the miners and the owners of the mines. In 1892, gunshots broke out between Union men and the replacement workers in the mine. The gunfight escalated and ignited a box of dynamite in one of the mills, causing 6 men to die. It got so bad that the governor of Idaho sent National Guards to Burke and declared martial law. But it didn't stop there. In 1899, when Bunker Hill Mining Company fired 17 miners for joining the Union, in response the laborers dynamited the Bunker Hill mine and more lives were lost. Then, with all of that history, plus other natural disasters like fires and avalanches, there is talk of paranormal activity in the area. Number 2. Terlinga, Texas, USA. The nickname of this town is Terlinga Ghost Town, and the motto is the Texas Ghost Town. It's also both a ghost town and not at the same time, I would say, because in the mid-1880s the discovery of cinnabar brought miners to the town, bringing the population to 2,000 people, but not much is left of those mining days. Now all that's left is a ghost town of the Stiuso Mining Company and several nearby capped and abandoned mines. But also, the 2010 census set it at a population of 58 people. This is mainly due to its proximity to Big Bend National Park, so it's mainly a tourist destination. There's also reported sightings of Elvis singing at the cemetery, so it can seem like Las Vegas in the desert, I guess. More of a desert. Las Vegas isn't really a desert, Last but not least, number 1, Buddville, New Mexico, USA. So Buddville was a tiny community along Route 66. It was established in 1928 by Howard Neal Bud Rice and his wife Flossie. They made many businesses, and Bud cozied up to local law enforcement, but also overcharged at his auto shop and imposed fines for those caught in his speeding traps. That may have not made too many people happy. In 1967, a stranger, thought to be Billy Ray White, entered the trading post and shot and killed Bud and a part-time employee. The assailant left with $450. That day changed the nickname of Budville to Bloodville, literally. Budville was still occupied until 1979 when Bud's widow Flossie passed away, and so it's now a ghost town, bought and sold many times throughout the years. Even though Route 66 isn't used, it has its own exit and entrance off the interstate because he cozied up to people that much.